Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we'll discuss mobility strategies in the federal government. With me today on the show are Rick Holgate, the Assistant Director for Science and Technology and the Chief Information Officer at ATF. Rick Walsh, the Mobility Lead for the U.S. Army. Steve Caimi, the Industry Solutions Specialist for Sourcefire, a Cisco company. Chris O'Connell, the VP of Federal Sales at Appian Corporation. And Jeffrey Ate, the Director of Public Sector for Good Technology. We're talking wireless, we're talking mobility. It's a hot topic. The trends are obvious. Everybody's moving in this direction. And we're lucky to have the subject matter experts we have with us. Let's get right into the question. Let's start with Rick Holgate over at ATF. Rick, can you cite some areas or examples of where progress is being made using mobility in government?
Well, sure, Jim, and thanks for having me on the show today. Sure. I do come to the show from two perspectives. One, in my day job as the CIO at ATF, but also as the president for the American Council for Technology.
I know that. That's
so, yeah, it's a great group that inspires collaboration across both government and industry around issues like mobility.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about progress in mobility in the federal government, obviously a lot of the discussion starts with the digital government strategy that was released in 2012, and a lot of the activity that came around that particular strategy and some of the deliverables and milestones that were part of that strategy. But even though those milestones ended in May of 2013, we've seen a lot of activity continue beyond that strategy through groups like the Mobile Technology Tiger Team, which is a great cross-agency cooperation around issues in mobile security. And DHS and DOJ and other agencies are actively participating in that to try and move the ball forward in terms of how we think about mobile security and what mobile security looks like in the federal government. And I have to put a plug in for our colleague who couldn't be here today, Dave McClure, and his Digital Services Innovation Center, where they're doing a lot of work to try and make it easier for agencies to adopt mobility across the board. And I'd have to also provide a plug for the ACT-IAC Advanced Mobility Working Group, which has been working on a lot of these same issues over the last couple of years, all around really lowering the barriers to adoption of mobility across the federal government. And when we talk about some of the specific progress that's been made, I think there's a huge amount of progress that's been made across a lot of agencies. I'll certainly defer to Rick to talk about what's been going on in DOD, but when you look at DOD and USDA and other organizations, you've seen them move toward a much more enterprise approach to some of the management infrastructure around mobility, like mobile device management and some of those kinds of capabilities. When you look at DHS, they've done a lot of work in the mobile application space in terms of ways of standardizing the vetting of applications that are developed internally or even through App Store applications and making that capability available across federal agencies. And then at the more user-facing level, you've seen a lot of agencies, whether it's the Veterans Affairs Department, agriculture through the National Agricultural Statistics Service, TSA, Census, develop a lot of innovative applications that support their user base. Mobile missions in the case of USDA, VA in the case of patient care and making interactions with veterans much more effective, and Census, getting out data like America's economy. So huge amount of innovation there, and I think you'll see that continuing.
Yeah, great. We'll get into some of those issues too as we talk here, but it's obviously the trends, and with the kids coming up from school, these trends are just going to accelerate because they're going to enter the workforce with dramatically different expectations than our days. Rick Walsh, how about the U.S. Army? Can you cite some areas where progress is being made with your mobility programs?
I think in the United States Army we see a great bit of progress being made. As a matter of fact, the top 20 leaders in the United States Army, being the political appointees, General Odiero, Chief of Staff of the Army, Undersecretary of the Army, all have mobile devices, smart mobile devices in their possession, and they use them. So
the boss has one, everybody else better know how to use them, right?
Boss has one, and it better work all the time.
Right.
Having said that, we have some outside the fact that our leadership has embraced the technology, we have some very interesting initiatives in the field looking at different ways to bring mobile technology to the workforce. The one I'd like to discuss real quick is the United States Army Recruiting Command.
Okay.
We have recruiters across the entire United States, and their job is to go out and meet young people, young candidates that are going to come into the service. So they have to work in their environment.
Right.
So Twitter, Facebook, the high school, the gym, a football game, that's where our recruiters are, and they're talking to young men and young women, asking them to join the Army. So they have to do it the way they want to do it. Right. We can't force them back into our technology. We have to do it in their technology. So.
Yeah. So it's all mobile. Interesting. Chris O'Connell, how about at Appian? How are you guys positioning to support your customers and to support this giant trend towards mobility and digital government?
Well, we're very excited about the move to mobility because we are a work platform, and it's a platform that delivers our applications on mobile devices. And so we have a large federal footprint and have been on the forefront with our customers and agencies and partnering and trying to move the ball forward and trying to get over the barriers to entry, as you put it. And we're seeing a lot of progress. It's very exciting. Just over the past couple of years, I think we've seen a transition from the initial data strategy where the government was opening up data sources for external parties to deliver information and applications to the internal government worker, the ones that are performing the mission, that are trying to reach across a country and performing their day-to-day jobs. We're starting to see that transition. And some of our customers doing site surveys for security, for incidents that occur across DHS and Air Force and some other areas that are very exciting. Looking forward to that continued growth of enabling the government worker to perform their job more efficiently and effectively.
Right, trying to stay out in front of that curve to make
right.
sure that the technology's there as these applications come along down the road. Steve Caimi over at Sourcefire, which is now part of Cisco. I think we all know Cisco's been big in the world of telecom and communications. Tell us how Sourcefire is now positioning to support the customer and take advantage and move forward for your program.
Yeah, definitely. I thought I'd just point out one thing. Obviously, the shift to mobility it's a major transformation, right?
Sure.
Agencies, they need help understanding the issues and things like that. And I think, we discussed on previous panels how security is a major issue. We look at things like, NIST, and NIST has put some specific guidance out around security. Special Publication 124 gets into very specific guidelines around what we need to do to make sure mobile devices are secure. And they've even gone as far as working with the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence to deliver a draft building block, right, to help build on that. So helping to build that awareness around the security issues. I think Cisco's gone and partnered with the Mobile Work Exchange last fall. We went and did an assessment of both government and commercial employees, and to get a better understanding about how people factor in to the secure mobility, right, the behaviors of people. And making that information available, we published a report earlier in January with very specific guidance for both organizations and people to help, make sure we stay secure. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit more on this panel about what specifically we're doing here at Cisco at Sourcefire to make that secure reality. But I think we're seeing some of that education, being a significant progress in the right direction.
And I think you do bring up a point. The security thing has been, in my opinion, one of the constraints that has been having people be a little leery about just how fast to go to mobility. But the good news, I think, about it is industry knows that that's the constraint. So industry knows that that is a major opportunity to address those issues. Absolutely. So these programs can move forward. Jeffrey 8 over at Good Technology. How are you guys positioning here for the mobility trend, and how are you playing? Obviously, being from Good, you've been from day one. This has been sort of your core capability.
Yeah, exactly. Good is an application and data security platform company around mobility. Right. So we've been working with the United States federal government for going on 6 years now, trying to help bring that security platform to non-BlackBerry devices, so iOS, Android, Windows Phone. So when we look at the market maturity, there's kind of 3 stages to that market maturity, right? So there's kind of the day one, I want to run my business the way that I run it today, so get email, calendar, contacts, et cetera. And then you move into, I want to grow my business and really do things with mobile devices that go beyond just getting email. And then the third phase is obviously transform. So as I look across the federal government, I look at certain agencies that are still at that kind of day one where it's like manage the devices, just get some email on there. We are picking up a lot of agencies that are now starting to add application capabilities on and then want to secure those application environments. And then when we look at the third phase of transform, that's where you're actually building your own applications internally to actually change the way that you do business by moving things that you used to do on your desktop and your laptop over to the mobile devices, specifically the tablets, that really put the power of being able to do what you want whenever, wherever you want to go. So across that broad spectrum, the DoD is kind of in the run part of it today. And I look at, the Department of Homeland Security is actually starting to get into the transform side of that. And there's a whole host of agencies in between that are still trying to figure out how do I migrate off of my legacy platform over to something that gives me a little bit more choice and brings the cost down. Yeah. So it's a pretty exciting time right now.
Yeah, I've been looking at some companies out there that are taking things that used to be on the desktop so that they work the same way on devices like this, and makes a big difference when you think of all those applications that are possible to the citizens of the United States that are interacting with the government in the future. Isn't going to be at a desktop computer. It's going to be through some type of mobile device. Rick, let's go to Rick Walsh this time for start on another question. Let's talk about a successful program. Can you, if I asked you to pick a program in your area that you feel like has really been doing well in mobility, is there one that would come to mind?
Probably the greatest example of the embracement of mobile technology is at the Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay.
They have several applications, and when I say this, it's because it doesn't just support the Army. It supports citizens. When there's a hurricane disaster, the Corps of Engineers collaborates with the Red Cross, with many, many organizations, FEMA, down in a disaster area, and they use mobile technology. They have two programs. One is called Blue Roof. So if you ever see it online, you look at, if you get the chance, you should look it up. But if you ever see it online, Blue Roof is when a hurricane comes through and citizens lose their roofs. A group of engineers go out to evaluate their house with a mobile device, and then they put a tarpaulin or a blue tarp on their roof to save their belongings in their house. The previous process took a couple days for all the paperwork and everything to get through the process. They can now make that assessment and get the process to get the workers and the material tools on site within hours. So now, not only are we doing something for the Corps of Engineers that benefits Corps of Engineers because they're more productive, but we're also doing something for the people. Their personal belongings are being saved.
Sure.
They also do another project at the Corps of Engineers, which is also a great project, is MICA. It's a mobile information gathering process, and what they do is they'll go out and they'll evaluate dikes and levees. They'll do engineering assessment of the environment where things could happen, floods, damage, all those, and they send that information back into the headquarters where the scientists and engineers are, but they do it from a mobile device. They gather information, they take pictures, that goes back inside the corporate office, and decisions are made there, and that's conveyed back. So now we know proactively where the weaknesses are on the dikes and such, and where the infrastructure is going to fail.
Sure. That's great. I mean, it's almost like your recruiters. They're going to where they need to go. Exactly. This is the same thing, as opposed to, you're going to where the work needs to get done, and in order, the technology needs to be there, and the technology is mobile. Rick Holgate, how about ATF? I asked you to cite, I always like to, on the show, highlight some positive programs that are being successful. If I asked you to pick one, what would come to mind?
And it'd actually be hard just to pick one, frankly, yeah. And I alluded to some of them earlier. I think, Veterans Affairs is an example of aggressive adoption of mobility. Certainly GSA is another one. I think, and they're probably the benchmark for the federal government in terms of moving into the mobile space. And I also mentioned the Department of Agriculture. Mm-hmm. And I think, the common element of all those organizations is, and we talked about some of this earlier, is they've got a relatively young workforce in a lot of cases. They've got people coming into the workplace with different expectations for what technology can do for them. And for the most part, they've got a very mobile work environment and mission. And so all of those drivers, I think, have caused them to move aggressively in the mobile space. I would say that when you look at successful mobile programs across the government, there's probably three characteristics of what a successful mobile program looks like. And frankly, I'm building on some of the comments that Jeff made with his run, grow, and transform analogy. I think, the one element is, you got to get the basics right of, understanding how to manage and secure the devices, get that management infrastructure in place, whether it's good, whether it's some other mobile device management technology, something that allows you to deliver those devices to your employees. I think, second is finding the innovative mobile use cases for your workforce and delivering and realizing those possibilities. And whether it's, care for patients or, field work or other types of use cases, finding those use cases and delivering the meaningful mobile technology and mobile capability to support those missions. And then last but not least, moving a lot of the legacy applications, off of some of the constraining platforms that they've been on, onto more device agnostic, in some cases cloud-based platforms that really allow you to deliver those capabilities independent of platforms. And so, certainly I would look at some of the work that GSA has done. I think Appian's a great example of that kind of a platform where you can move legacy capabilities, legacy systems onto a platform that really doesn't care about the device from which you're accessing those capabilities. So I think those are kind of the three major characteristics of what a successful program looks
Terrific.
like.
That's great stuff there. I like that. I'll use that, I'm sure, many times over. Let's talk about some of the success stories we're seeing in industry. Let's start this time with Steve Caimi over at Sourcefire. What are some of the, if I asked you to identify a successful case example of a story where mobility is making a big difference, what would you pick, Steve?
I would probably pick up on Rick Walsh's example of the Army Corps of Engineers working with FEMA. Right.
Okay.
When I talked about mobility being a major transformation, I think FEMA's really embraced that concept. Right. They've gone and put the right training in place. They've gone and undergone, I guess in the past 2 years or so, they've gone and put together a major transformation program to really get people to adopt the mobility program. I think they've called it every employee is an emergency response manager. Right. So that concept is a great umbrella argument for mobility, right?
Absolutely.
Disasters can happen anywhere, so they need to be prepared. I thought a great quote from Tanya Schreiber. She's the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer at FEMA. She pointed out that if you can't get your job done in a disaster, then you can't get your job done. We want to make sure that the disaster environment is how we function, and it's our steady state every day. And I think that just captures the essence of true mobility, right? If it's the norm and not the exception, right? So making those those things happen. Not only that, FEMA is going to see significant cost savings and reduction of buildings and utilities and overall better mission improvement.
Sure. It's a great example you picked. I'm actually involved each year in the AFCEA Homeland Security Conference. We're doing it next week, and the department actually came to me and they wanted a showcase FEMA and what FEMA's doing in this area. We're actually doing it under the guise of a big data analytics panel, but it was all about how they're analyzing all that data on mobile devices. So it's interesting you picked the one that FEMA also picked to showcase at that event. Well done. Jeff, if I asked you to identify what you believe as a successful program, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think, piling on the FEMA thing, right? So, FEMA has actually embraced this technology and moved it out to secure those applications, because as you're collecting the information on these disaster victims, you've got, personal information, you've got PMI, PII. You need to make sure that that's secure. You've got contractors actually collecting that information. So you put a tablet out there, you collect the data, and then you need to secure that information, get it back so someone can actually start processing it on the backside. Additionally, if you look at what ICE is doing under DHS, they've now built a complete collaboration environment to allow their agents to actually communicate and collaborate with each other. And they've embraced actually bringing that whole back-end office environment together. So it's not only just email, it's also IM and presence. It's being able to share files so that you don't have multiple copies out there. So I see collaboration moving more into the mobile environment where, it's not just about sending email anymore. If you think about text messaging, people text message more than they send emails, and a lot of the information that's actually in a text message can be as equally sensitive as what you would put into an email. So you need to be able to protect that and secure that as well. So.
Sure, interesting environment. If I want to communicate with my kids, it's text anymore. If I want to communicate in real time, it has to be text, but interesting world changing. And Chris, I want to hear from you on this too, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rick Holgate from ATF, Rick Walsh from the Army, Steve Caimi from Sourcefire, a Cisco company, Chris O'Connell from Appian, and Jeffrey Eight from Good Technology. We're talking mobility in government and mobility applications. When we went to the break, we were talking about successful programs, and we didn't have a chance to hear from Chris O'Connell before we took that break. Chris, could you give us some ideas, or from your perspective, what's a good program you've seen that you would come to mind here to talk about?
Yeah, there are a couple, but one of the ones that I think really are on the forefront, they were mentioned earlier, is GSA, because they are open to embracing the technology, looking for those use cases, and then applying them where appropriate. And on the Appian platform, we don't care what type of mobile device you have, but we are very centered on future-proofing applications. And that means when you are able and ready via policy, security, and other items that you're ready to deploy right away at no additional cost. So we've seen our customers that have deployed applications on our platform that have then come back and deployed mobile applications by downloading an app. And that's it. So one example is GSA at Public Building Service. They built their new leasing system, one of the largest real estate organizations in the world. And they are doing their leasing, a very long collaborative process, not as much collaboration as they would like. They've deployed, and the CIO wanted the data that was coming from the system on his mobile device. Well, he downloaded the application and he had it. They were also able to apply a site inspection application that we have done in the commercial realm, over 20,000 stores globally being looked at on tablets, kicking off the analytics, the data gathering, the reports, the rules associated with scoring the assessments, and even kicking off orders for new pieces if something was wrong. Well, that applies to a site survey and a leasing process. Right. So they were able to take that and within 2 days deliver that site survey application as part of the leasing process. Right. On the other side of the house, they're building a new contract writing system. That contract writing system is not something you would traditionally think of as a mobile app, right, but they are delivering it on a platform, and with the idea of being able to deliver collaboration across the contract officers, the requirement owners, in order to deliver the right system, contract, and it's something that we saw over at DISA when they were one of our first to push forward with a BlackBerry with a CAC sled on it and delivering data for acquisition applications. So,
you know, years ago when we did this show, we were talking about the fact that once the bandwidth's there and the wireless connectivity's there and the speeds are there, it's going to be like open up a whole new world of applications that we haven't even dreamed of. And I think that's what we're seeing happening now. I mean, every day there's something new that, you know, someone never even thought about just a couple years back. And we talked about the kids coming into the workforce. Yeah, they're going to come in and they're going to want an app for that. You know, they're not going to want to, you know, that's going to be the expectation. So the question is getting out in front of that. Let's talk a little bit about priorities. We talked about programs that are successful today. But how about, look, what are your priorities, you know, short-term priorities here for, let's say, the next year or so? What are you looking to work on? Let's start with Rick Holgate again. Rick, what are your big priorities for the upcoming year here in terms of next steps in your programs?
Sure. Well, thanks, Jim. Yeah, and I would characterize our priorities in two general areas, one of which is, you know, now that most of us within the Department of Justice have gotten relatively comfortable with managing mobile devices, you know, commercial mobile devices, we've got them all, you know, distributed throughout our workforce, it's really looking at how do we more economically and more efficiently deliver some of those, what are now essentially commodity services, across the department. So we've been working very closely with the other components within DOJ, with the Office of the CIO at DOJ, to look at things like moving some of our mobile device management capability to a common, preferably as a service model, because it has, in a relatively short amount of time, you know, a couple of years, gone from being something that, frankly, none of us had ever really heard of to something that's now essentially a commodity. and you know, looking at, now that we've gotten to that point, you know, recognizing that and moving those services to the most economical model possible to deliver them to our users. And then at the same time, and again, kind of going back to the maturity model that Jeff alluded to earlier, it's now focusing our attention more on the grow and transform platform aspect of things. So really focusing more on the application space and delivering those meaningful applications to our users that really change the way they do business. And we're certainly looking at that within ATF because of the highly mobile nature of what we do, both in law enforcement and regulation, where you can imagine there are some pretty compelling things that we can deliver on a mobile device that would really significantly change the way our people in the field get the job done. And that's really going to be our focus over the next year, is looking at where are those opportunities and focusing on delivering the capabilities necessary to realize that. One example is case management, where we've got an old case management system. We could certainly make it available on a mobile device in a very inelegant and not very user-friendly fashion, but that doesn't really meet the needs of the user in the field. So it's how do we translate some of those legacy systems and legacy business processes into a truly mobile environment that focuses on truly enabling what our workforce does when they're in the field. And so that's where we're going to really be focusing our efforts in the next year.
Yeah,
So.
I agree too. I think it's a big trend too, is how do we get to some of these traditional things that are, landline locked and get them so they're available wherever they need to be available. Rick Walsh, how about priorities over at the U.S. Army? What are some of your priorities for the upcoming year?
Well, the biggest priority we have right now is converting a mobile device into a work platform. Okay, so I want the user to be able to do his job wherever he is, and that includes applications. So part of that process when we look at applications is we're working across the federal government as well as the DoD to establish a reciprocity agreement such that if the Air Force runs a program and evaluates and vets and tests an application and it's good enough for the Air Force, we want to make sure that it's good enough for the Army, and I don't want to start over from scratch. There are 2 million applications currently available today between Apple and Google in the 2 million in the stores. So there's a pretty good chance that there's something in one of those stores that I can use. So I can't vet or test 2 million applications to figure out what I want to do. So if the Air Force, their business in the Navy and the Marine Corps, our businesses are similar. Some people tell you that they're very different, but we're similar. But if they vet it, why can't I use it? So establishing that reciprocity, taking advantage of group vetting. So I want a crowd vetting. I want to take advantage of DOJ. I want to take advantage of the federal space. I want to take advantage of the rest of the DoD. So right now, I have 150 apps. I want to have 250 apps in the next 6 months.
2 million. I think you just created a cottage industry. There are going to be companies now saying that go in and their job's going to be to look at what you do and select the priority apps for your device because they can't go through 2 million of them.
A real quick anecdote to that is Colonel Grendel just left is at the Army War College. He's got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. There is a tutorial app for an iOS device that teaches a 4-year-old how to develop apps.
Wow.
So his kids at 4 years old are learning how to write apps for an iOS device.
Yeah.
It transfers to Android, but the idea that they can think logically and create that. So, I mean, it's just there. So the kids,
Wow.
not today's kids.
Yeah,
We're
right.
talking about tomorrow's kids are already developing apps at 5 and 6 years old.
I'm glad I made it through the CIO hierarchy before these kids began competing with me because I have a feeling they're going to be, from a technology perspective, they're going to be far more advanced. Chris O'Connell, how about some of priorities that you guys have? What's hot that you're moving on?
Yeah, well, obviously it's continued to deliver on the promises of our platform and work with our customers to deliver innovative applications. We're looking next year, Department of Transportation is looking at doing some really interesting work with transit workers and transit data, and that being out remote, and that's something that's very exciting. And for me personally, sessions like this where we can collaborate across industry with government and share best practices with our customer base in order to show, yes, it can be done.
Right.
Yes, we can think about mobility differently for your internal workers as well. And I do think that it takes a much broader scope. We can't have 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 4 dozen applications all loaded onto one piece. We need to think about mobility differently as a window to get our work done. And that's accessing the data. It's accessing the systems through this window. and delivering it seamlessly so that there isn't that great divide between desktop and mobility. So that's what we're pushing for with Appian.
Terrific. Yeah, and I like your comment. It's what I like about getting together like this. These shows, you guys keep me smart. I learn something from everybody every show, and the old adage, none of us is as smart as all of us, and I think we all collectively learn a few new things with every show we do. Jeffrey, how about over at Good? What's your priorities for what's on the table? What's on the front burner for this year?
Well, it's an exciting year for us, and it's there's quite a bit going on in Good. I would say that there's probably four main priorities that we're focusing on that I think really affects the federal government. So first and foremost is to continue to enhance and expand our application and data security platform by adding shared service components in there that allow applications to communicate with each other to reduce the user experience. Today there's, you open it, you save it, you open it, you save it, and it's a lot of flipping, and I think we're building that interoperability between those applications in a secure fashion to allow that
Make it more user-friendly.
more workflow capability to support transformation. Secondly, we'll use that shared services framework to actually build our next generation of applications, which are contextually aware collaboration components, and that's really where you're going to see Good's focus is around that collaboration capability of applications we build. The platform then supports the third-party ISVs and the enterprise-built application environment. The third priority, I think, is to expand the footprint of where our applications run. So you've already seen what we've done around iOS and Android. We just recently made a strategic announcement with Samsung that we're going to actually put our container inside of one of the Knox domains. So that will come out. That's actually a separate platform that I think the government is very, very interested in. And then the fourth item is we just recently announced our intention to acquire Boxtone. And that's not to enhance our MDM strategy. That's really around service management. So if you start thinking about when you get multiple devices with multiple applications across the enterprise, you really need to be able to manage that in complete service management component around that mobility. And that includes application analytics as well as device analytics, as well as being able to have help desks that are common interfaces across, because no one wants to get locked into a single vendor anymore. So that's different platforms, different operating systems, different application environments. So you're going to have to be able to support that infrastructure to actually manage this in a
Yeah, I think that interoperability is a big issue too. I agree with you there.
So those are our main priorities.
Yeah, I think people are going to want to be able to communicate with anyone they want to communicate with and not have to have specific devices or technologies to do that. Steve, Caimi, how about priorities? What's on your front burner for moving down the next year or so?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Cisco does a lot of things in terms of secure mobile enablement, right? We have things like, AnyConnect VPN type technology for secure communication, and, WebEx for secure collaboration and so forth. But, speaking more from a security perspective, at the RSA conference, we talked about intelligent cybersecurity for the real world. And mobile devices make up the real world today, as we know. So our focus is to continue to remove those security barriers so that agencies can continue to make progress in their mobility strategies. I saw a GAO report from late 2012 that talked about the shocking increase in advanced malware that's being seen, right? So I think NIST points that out in their guidance for mobile smartphones and tablets and so forth. That the malware threat is real. So if we were to take a look at Cisco Sourcefire's three top priorities. The first is really about being visibility driven, right? We need to be able to know what's out there, right? It's really hard to know with all the mobile devices and virtualization and the cloud and so forth. So to really be able to see everything that's out there is a first step into protecting it, right? Driving intelligent action.
I'm sure that's a challenge, just knowing everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And the second aspect is around being threat focused, right? NIST recommends a threat management approach, right, in their guidance for agencies. So to continue to be focused against threats is a key aspect here, right? So we'll continue to deliver things like advanced malware protection, intrusion prevention against things like smartphones and things as they become more ubiquitous. And then finally is the aspect of being platform-based, right? We need to be able to drive that, open and agile platform that helps, centralize, manage, right? To be able to manage inventories and things like that. So to really be able to manage it in a holistic manner.
Yeah, I heard that platform-based come up quite a bit now in terms of thinking about the mobility as the platform, as opposed to just a device that is a part of a platform. Let's talk about, we talked about some of the good things happening, programs, priorities. How about the hard things? How about the difficult stuff? Let's talk about some challenges. What are some of the big challenges? I think we had an obvious one on the table already: security. I think I think the challenge is to stay proactive and try to stay in front of the threats. But there's a lot of other challenges I'm sure you bump into as you work your way through this. So let's talk about some. Let's start with Rick Walsh this time. Rick, what are some of the things that are still difficult, things that are challenges for you that you need to overcome to be where you want to go with these programs?
I think everyone can appreciate the physical crisis that we're currently in. Money is a huge challenge. The Army and the DoD, and traditionally we run on a 3 to 5 year technology refresh with traditional architecture. That doesn't work in commercial mobile. When we embrace commercial mobile, we embrace commercial technology. We embrace the commercial marketplace. Right. Okay, if you look at where we're going, tech refresh is 6 months to a year.
Sure.
If I operate in my current mode, my current operating environment, where I'm 3 to 5 years, how old is an iPhone? How old is a Samsung? I'm not even there yet. I can't even put those things on the table because of my own processes. So I have to look at, how do I do technology refresh? How do I do that? And how do I do it with the money that I have? Money is a critical factor in us moving forward. So not only do we embrace new technology, but I have to embrace it smartly and efficiently. How do I, and then to make that happen, let's look at not the first order effect of how we're going to save money and gain efficiency. Look at the second and third order effect. Mm-hmm. What does mobile allow me to do? Allows me to get out of the office. Allows me to work not in a workspace. So 10% of the people don't have to work 1 day a week. You don't have 1 day paper, you don't have to work. That's 10% of your time you're not in the office. Could I cut 10% of my ecological footprint off? I don't need floor space for 10% of people. Look at what GSA's done in terms of their floor space. It did some amazing things in terms of mobilizing the workforce. Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge for our listening audience out there in industry. It's going to be, what are some offsets here? What are the value propositions? Mm-hmm. How can you do things like reduce your real estate cost or reduce your floor space cost, or what are the offsets? And I think the government has challenge in the budget to be able to move monies to do that. Mm-hmm. I know one of the big things holding back teleworking and things like that and teleconferencing was, money for travel is in one set of budget and IT budget's over here. So to save money here, you got to take money from here, and sometimes that's not easy to do in the government. But I think the government, to embrace it, has to start moving and get things done in that direction. And I want to continue this dialogue on challenges, but we first need to take another short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rick Holgate from ATF, Rick Walsh from the Army, Steve Caimi from Sourcefire, a Cisco company, Chris O'Connell from Appian Corporation, and Jeffrey Eight from Good Technology. We're talking mobility. When we went to break, we were talking about constraints. We heard from Rick Walsh over U.S. Army. Rick Holgate, what are some of the challenges you have every day, some of the things you're trying to, hurdles jump over to get your programs where you want them to go?
Sure, and obviously we talked already about things related to technology and security and that sort of thing, and I would focus a little bit more on, frankly, some of the cultural aspects. And so when we talk about realizing some of the benefits of mobility, we talked earlier about the real estate savings, and depending on the projections you look at, they're huge, but that also gets to a very cultural issue of organizations being very attached to real estate. And I would say a related challenge is what I would call very generally untethering from the desktop. So and that's not it's not, literally, it's desktop in every sense of the word. So it's literally the physical desktop of the way you think about getting your work done at a desk, and breaking some of that mindset about how you think about what your work looks like and where you do your work. And some of it is also desktop and, frankly, the Windows sense, because we've built a lot of business processes around that kind of a computing environment, and it becomes sometimes very difficult to break that mold and to get out of that mindset of that's the way I get to my job done. Those are the tools that I use, and that gets into things like the applications that we build, the file formats that we use, and some of the constraints that they then impose on us if we try to translate some of that into a mobile environment. We see some of that where our business processes are built around Word documents and PDF files and a variety of other things, which nothing wrong with them in a desktop environment. They don't necessarily translate very well into a mobile space, and breaking some of that thought process around that's the way I get my job done becomes a cultural issue that we need to address. Some of it also is moving some of the traditional capabilities that we deliver in a desktop environment to a mobile device, and anything from as mundane a capability as things like file sharing or collaboration in the form of VTC and instant messaging and some of that kind of thing. I mean, applications exist for all that in the mobile space, but it's the challenge of making all of that as seamless as possible in the mobile environment, as opposed to this awkward collection of multiple applications that create a very disjointed user experience. So it's really, as you said, moving to an integrated mobile platform that delivers a seamless experience for the users.
Yeah, great stuff. And we're 102 for 102 right now. And what I mean by that is this is our 102nd radio show. And at some point on all 102 shows, someone's brought up the fact that culture is a big issue, not just technology. So you got our record intact there, Rick. But and you're right. This untethering. Sometimes I'm sitting and doing text messaging or with a client or with a government person, and so in my car, and I'll be thinking to myself, well, I got to get to work. Then I say to myself, but actually, I am doing work right now. And when you think about it, I don't know where I work. I kind of work everywhere. I guess wherever you happen to be is the new world we live in. Jeff. How about you? What are some constraints that you face, some of the tough challenges that you still need to overcome?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it really isn't about technology, right? So technology can solve lots of problems. The biggest constraint that we run in with government is the evolving policies around mobile devices. So if you think about the plan that has been laid out, so you need an effective MDM, you need an effective mobile application management environment, you need to be able to protect the data, and then you have to have some kind of identity and access management. Those are the four main components that have been laid out in the federal strategy, right? The policy around each of those pieces is moving so rapidly across the federal government that it's almost impossible to build technology to meet the requirement, because as soon as I build it,
ahead of the curve.
the requirement changes. So that has been our biggest challenge over the last 12 months, is the government is adapting its policies to try to meet mobility. But for 3 years, they've been basically telling us to go build this and we'll buy it, and now all of a sudden that's changing. So we've now got to re-sync our technology back with the current direction that the policy is changing. And
I got it.
Just
Good.
timing.
Chris O'Connell, what do you think? What's a big constraint out there? What's a challenge you have to overcome to move forward?
Yeah, I think policy and security are both obviously critical, but Rick Walsh brought up a very key point. Budgets have been cut off. There have not been new starts for multiple years now.
We've been through some rough times.
Right, and prior to kind of the budget crisis that the government was forced through, and I think is still kind of in at the moment, was that they looked at mobility separately as an individual piece that they had to go fund. And that's true from an infrastructure perspective, but from an application deployment perspective, that doesn't need to be the case. And the exciting thing is, as we're coming out of this, and we've seen at least some budget, that you have the visionary leaders in the government that are pushing forward and looking at mobility as part of every program that they are doing, as part of every application and the modernization that is occurring. Because if you are delivering an application today, if you're developing and then deliver it and it's not mobile enabled, it's going to be legacy application. And you are going to end up spending more money to mobile enable it, and it may be disjointed, like Rick was mentioning. So I think that's a strategic shift that we're starting to see with these programs, the mobility requirements intertwined with that. Rick Holgate, with his case management system and other items, recognizes in order to do the job effectively, in order to do it efficiently from a budget perspective, you need to plan that into your acquisitions and your applications that you are planning to deliver today.
Yeah, it's got to be an upfront thought. Good, very good point, Chris. We're down to under 12 minutes left in the show. Always like to end the show by talking the future, a little vision out to the future, what it looks like down the road. Let's start with Jeff, and we'll work our way back to me here. What do you see as, where's this all going? What kind of improvements will we see in the future? What will the government look like down the road because of this mobility trend? Jeff, what's your crystal ball say?
Yeah, I think, just to go back to what I said before, I really believe the government is heading towards transforming the way that they do business, moving off of legacy desktop or laptop-based environments, taking advantage of the mobile platform. I believe that the technology is there today to meet the security requirements to get that process going. In the future, I see this moving out to that application environment. I also see that it will expand outside of just the enterprise infrastructure today and expand out to contractors and actual constituents being part of that mobile strategy and being able to provide those applications in a secure, safe fashion, depending upon what the use case is for each of those points, and ultimately encompassing, the Internet of Things to really have mobility be part of the fabric by which government works every day. And that will help them save money. It will enable them to support telework, reduce the footprint, and get a higher degree of efficiency out of their workforce. So that's really where I see things
Terrific.
going.
Well said. Steve, Caimi, what do you see as the future? Where's this all going? What will we look like down the road because of this mobility trend?
Yeah, when I look at these, all these strategies that are in place, they're there to fulfill goals. Right. So when we talk about some of the goals that have been set out by the government, for example, the Telework Enhancement Act, obviously telework isn't true mobility, but it's a step in the right direction. And if we can clear out those, all the security objections, malware, right, a lot of the things that we had talked about earlier, we'll really be able to realize the promise of the Telework Act, right? Some of the goals set forth are obviously improved continuity of operations, better mission enablement and so forth, reduce costs, the obvious things there. And better work-life balance, right? The government needs to be able to attract and retain top talent, and this is one way to do it.
Right.
But then secondly, I think it was Rick Holgate who pointed out the promise of the digital government strategy, right? There's a number of goals there that we're trying to accomplish through true mobility, even into, reaching citizens in new ways and offering innovative new services, right? Mobilizing the power of government, I think Barack Obama put in the digital government strategy. So I think we'll see. We'll start with some of the promises of the Telework Act, but, really the new digital government of the future.
Yeah, it's going to be fun watches. It's fun doing the show year after year after year and just seeing how these advances take place. It's been interesting. Chris O'Connell, Appian, what do you see as, what's it look like down the road? What's this mobility going to mean to the future?
Yeah, mobility is going to be the way we work. I think I shared on an earlier discussion with you that I think that term mobility kind of fades to the background because it is more and more the way that people are accessing information technology, collaborating, and getting work done. And one of the things that I've seen over this past year is that I think the user interface, even for more complex applications, is going to be delivered in a mobile-enabled form. And so what your applications look like on the desktop will equal what they look like on the mobile device because it's easier to train, deliver, and I think you're going to see, looking back, that it was funny when there was such a disjointed view of applications from your desktop to your mobile device.
Yeah, excellent point there, and I think you're right. Maybe we won't be talking about mobility anymore. It'll just be, inherently obvious that it's just part of the way we work. Won't even be seen as something separate. Rick Walsh, what do you think? What's it look like down the road to you? Where's this all going?
Well, where are we going? Mobile as a workspace. Okay, you're going to work where you are. Okay, with that, So in the office, you plug in, on the road, you're on the cloud. You see unified capabilities are going to come into play. We're going to be able to do voice over IP, collaboration, texting, talking, all over our mobile devices. So we're going to have all that in place. That's where we're going to go. Okay? And I need to get away, in my end state is I want to get away from devices. I want to manage data and I want to manage people. Okay? Get away from the device. Because what really is, what's important? Data. Data and the people. The device is a conduit.
Right.
We're not there yet. It's going to take a while, but the future is a device-independent mobile environment.
Right. What are we going to do with all these buildings and this brick and mortar stuff when everybody's working wherever they happen to be at the time? It's going to be an interesting world. Rick Holgate, you've been working this from the ATF perspective as well as from the ACT-IAC and some of the government-wide programs. Where do you see this all going? What's it going to look like down the road?
Yeah, well, I'd have to agree with Rick in terms of, I think certainly our mindset's going to evolve from protecting devices to protecting data and applications. And I think that has to happen. You're seeing some of that already. I think that's going to continue to increase, and we're going to continue to move in that direction. You know, I mentioned some of the work that the Mobile Technology Tiger team is doing around translating identity, credential, and access management into the mobile space for two reasons. One is a security reason, and the other is an enablement reason, because at some point we have to make it much more seamless for users to be able to interact with data and applications in the mobile environment, and the whole ICAM infrastructure to do that is critical. I think, and Rick alluded to this a little bit, I think at some point you're going to see the government stop providing devices to their users. I mean, we're almost there now in the sense that exactly, because as Rick said, I mean, we can't keep up with the evolution of technology, and frankly our users have better technology than we provide them anyway, and so trying to keep up with that pace of technology is just a losing battle. And so I think you're going to see that natural evolution, and I think you're going to see continued emphasis at the administration level on this whole notion of digital government. I mean, if you look at the FY15 President's budget that was just released, there's a whole range of information in there about continuing the emphasis on a 21st century government, realizing the promise of better service delivery to citizens, enhanced productivity for the workforce. So I think you're going to see continued emphasis in those areas.
Yeah. Excellent points. And you brought up the identity piece. And, I mentioned before that we were talking years ago, and as the bandwidth grows and the wireless infrastructure builds out all these applications, I actually think the identity piece is another missing piece. If you can just get that identity piece down so that you absolutely know who's on the device, whatever, then the world just opens up into all kinds of additional opportunities. Let me try to do some recapping here. Another excellent, great dialogue, guys. This was really good stuff. The first thing, right off the top, we know the mobility is exploding. I mean, it's now in high gear, jumped into high gear, and it's the world of the future is going to be based on mobility. I like some of the points being made there. Some of the programs brought up that we need to go where the work is, as opposed to people coming to a centralized point. And the examples there with FEMA and Army recruiting, and a lot of the things that GSA are embracing in terms of getting the devices necessary to do the work where the work is, as opposed to coming to centralized locations. I like the three characteristics that we talked about getting the basics right, which is fundamental. Make sure we get the basic things in places. And then looking at the different use cases. What are some innovation around different use cases we can have? And then the idea of moving this legacy stuff out of the legacy world, and how can we get it into these new platforms? We talked about with the bandwidth and identity, if you can dream it, it's probably going to happen. Things are just going to be happening out there. Priorities, I heard about more efficient delivery of apps and delivery of devices. I heard about a lot of opportunities. An example was brought up about case management and things like that, where you've got law enforcement officers that are out in the field, obviously able to be much more efficient with case management if they don't have to worry about the paperwork to be done when they come back into the office. And we talked a lot, and what really came across is mobile devices as a platform. Begin thinking of it as a platform and not just a device. We talked about visibility, threat focus, the security challenges, the need for security to be proactive and get out in front of that. The money remains a big challenge, and I guess the challenge I have for our listening audience is we need to be creative. If we're going to move forward with mobility, we have to find ways to reduce other costs and be creative in approaches. We had the issue of culture, and that's a big one, and the untethering of people just by their human nature, anything that's different becomes makes people nervous. And so now when you're talking about no longer having that nice desktop on your computer to work on, and in the speed of change, we talked about as being a constraint too. Things are happening just so fast that to keep up with that change. Future, mobility will be the way we work in the future. It's a foregone conclusion that's where we're going. Today, I think we're really in the throes of the transformation. We're right in the middle of transforming the way we work from traditional ways to mobility ways. And we heard about mobile as a workforce concepts coming up, and the idea that maybe the term mobility will just fade because it'll just become the standard operating procedure and just be the way we work, and we won't be talking about it as something different than what it is. With that, I want to turn and first thank our panelists from taking time from your busy schedules. This was tremendous dialogue, and so thanks for taking time. I want to thank our sponsors, without which we don't have a show, for being part of this. Our good friends here at Federal News Radio, who always put on a great show for us, or allow us to put on a show. And of course, most importantly, we want to thank our listening audience who tune in and listen to the show, and hope that the dialogue here sparks some more creative thoughts for industry and government to work together for more successful programs in the future. With that, we'll end the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.